The Vraxians weren't throwing a parade so much as a synchronized display of militant superiority when Krasoth received his final commendation. Thousands of warriors, each standing in formation so perfect you could bounce a quantum particle off the geometric precision of their lines, roared their approval as the High Command fastened the legendary mantle of conquest around his massive shoulders. "All hail the Supreme Champion," bellowed the Archgeneral, his voice amplified by both technology and evolutionary adaptations that allowed Vraxians to be heard over planetary bombardments. "All hail the embodiment of our strength." If the assembled masses noticed how the ground literally trembled beneath their feet, not from their collective voice, but from the micro-seismic activity triggered by their synchronized stomping, they certainly didn't mention it. Subtlety had never been a Vraxian strong suit. The civilization that had produced this spectacle was so obsessed with physical prowess that they made ancient Sparta look like a wellness retreat. The Vraxians had evolved on a planet with twice Earth's gravity and atmosphere so thick you could practically swim through it. This had resulted in a species with muscles on top of muscles, exoskeletons that could withstand small artillery fire, and attitudes that made DMV employees seem downright cheerful. "Superior strength is superior right," went their insufferably repetitive motto, typically bellowed at diplomatic functions right before they flipped over the refreshment table to demonstrate their dominance. It was the intergalactic equivalent of the guy at the gym who grunts loudly while lifting weights that are clearly too heavy for him. For 12 millennia, the Vraxian Empire had expanded across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, subjugating or incorporating every sentient species they encountered. Some species fought back with technology. They were crushed. Others tried diplomacy. They were crushed while being lectured about their weakness. A few attempted to flee. They were pursued, then, you guessed it, crushed. The Vraxians weren't known for their creativity. What they were known for was their peculiar leadership system. The Empire wasn't ruled by bloodline or election, or even the traditional whoever kills the previous leader method so popular among warrior cultures. No, the Vraxians had elevated their strength obsession into a Byzantine tournament system that would make professional sports leagues blush at its complexity. Every 7 cycles, roughly equivalent to 15 Earth years, warriors from across the Empire would gather to bash each other senseless in increasingly difficult challenges. These weren't mere battles. That would be too straightforward for a species that had turned violence into performance art. Competitors had to demonstrate strength while hanging upside down in acid rain, or while being slowly digested by semi-sentient fungi, or while reciting the 4,000 verses of the Vraxian honor code backward. The process took months, eliminated thousands, and was broadcast across the Empire with higher ratings than the season finale of any soap opera. By the time a champion emerged, they had essentially proven themselves not just the strongest, but also the most determined, stubborn, and borderline masochistic being in known space. In other words, the perfect embodiment of Vraxian values. The current champion, and thus de facto emperor, general, and cultural icon all rolled into one, was a specimen who went by the name of Krasoth. If Vraxians could be described as walking tanks, then Krasoth was a walking battleship. Standing 3 meters tall, with a carapace so thick it had its own weather patterns, he had never lost a fight. Not in training, not in war, not even in the traditional Vraxian greeting ritual, which involved headbutting hard enough to cause minor concussions. Krasoth's path to supremacy hadn't followed the usual trajectory. Most champions came from the military or gladiatorial academies. Krasoth had emerged from the mines of Vrax 7, a frontier colony where Vraxians extracted precious minerals by punching through solid rock rather than using machinery. "Technology is a crutch for the weak," they'd say, right before spending 6 hours trying to knock loose a chunk of ore that a laser could have removed in seconds. His fighting style was unorthodox, a fusion of traditional Vraxian combat techniques and improvised movements developed while dodging cave-ins. Where other warriors relied on brute force and pre-rehearsed combat sequences, Krasoth adapted. He was unpredictable, he was innovative, He was, by Vraxian standards, practically a revolutionary, which meant he occasionally used his left claw when tradition dictated using the right. The final tournament that crowned him had been the most watched event in Vraxian history. The last challenge had involved fighting atop a platform suspended over a black hole, with gravity fluctuating randomly and atmospheric pressure changing every 30 seconds. Millions watched as Krazoth defeated the previous champion by using the variable gravity to amplify his strikes, a tactic so clever that half the audience missed its significance because they were busy yelling about dishonor. Upon his victory, Krazoth was ceremonially encased in the armor of dominion, a suit so ridiculously ornate that it added another half-ton to his already considerable weight. His crest was painted with precious metals, his battle claws were reinforced with materials stolen from civilizations now extinct. A cape made from the hides of 100 predator species was affixed to his shoulders, creating a draft so strong it knocked over smaller Vaxians when he turned too quickly. With his new position came new responsibilities. As Supreme Champion, Krazoth was expected to lead military campaigns, crush rebellions, and represent the unassailable might of the Vraxian people to the rest of the galaxy. He was to be strategist, warrior, and walking propaganda poster all at once, a role he approached with the stoic determination typical of his species, minus the traditional complaints about the food at diplomatic functions. It was during his third cycle as Supreme Champion that the Vraxian long-range scouts returned with news of a previously undiscovered world in a rather unfashionable arm of the galaxy. Initial scans suggested it was inhabited by a species that appeared to lack exoskeletons, significant muscle mass, or even proper fangs. They called themselves humans, though the scout who reported this had trouble pronouncing it without making it sound like a respiratory condition. "Unimpressive specimens," declared the chief intelligence officer, a Vraxian so decorated with battle scars that he looked like a walking topographical map. "Their planet has merely standard gravity. Their atmosphere is thin, their bodies are covered in nothing but soft tissue. They would crumple under the weakest Vraxian hatchling's embrace." The initial assessment was met with the usual response: preparation for conquest. Standard procedure when encountering new species was to send in the assault ships, demonstrate overwhelming force, accept their surrender, incorporate useful aspects of their culture, usually limited to their martial arts and weapon designs, and move on to the next target. But then came the confusing reports. "They appear physically weak, yes," admitted a reconnaissance specialist, "but they've survived multiple extinction-level events. They've developed technology that compensates for their physical limitations. They wage war constantly against each other." This last detail particularly disturbed the Vraxian High Command. The concept of internal warfare was foreign to them. Vraxians might beat each other unconscious in tournaments or challenge rituals, but the species as a whole maintained absolute unity against external threats. These humans seemed to lack even this basic evolutionary advantage. "Perhaps," suggested an advisor whose carapace showed signs of advanced age, "they are more dangerous than they appear. Deception is a tactic we've encountered before." The debate continued for days, with the Vraxian leadership split between those who advocated immediate invasion and those who urged caution. Finally, Krazoth spoke, his voice reverberating through the chamber like distant thunder. "I will go," he announced. The chamber erupted in protests, which Krazoth silenced by slamming his battle claw against the floor hard enough to crack the reinforced stone. "A full invasion force would tell us only how they face overwhelming odds. I will discover how they truly fight, how they truly think. I will assess whether they merit the honor of facing our armies or the mercy of quick extinction." No one argued further, partly out of respect for their champion's wisdom, but mostly because contradicting someone who could literally tear you in half was generally considered poor career planning. And so it came to pass that the most powerful warrior in the Vraxian Empire found himself approaching a small blue planet in an unremarkable scout ship contemplating the strange creatures he would soon encounter. The Braxian scout ship, designed for stealth rather than comfort, a common theme in Braxian engineering, bypassed Earth's primitive detection systems and landed in what the ship's computer identified as a low-population area. As the landing ramp extended with a pneumatic hiss that most species would consider unnecessarily dramatic, Krazoth emerged into the light of an alien sun. He found himself on the outskirts of what humans would call a small town, and Vraxians would call a pitifully inadequate population center, not worth the energy required to crush it. The structures were made of materials so flimsy that Krazoth could have walked through them without noticing. The roads were barely reinforced. Even the air felt wrong. Too light, too easy to breathe. Like it wasn't even trying. Activating his cloaking device, one of the few technologies the Vraxians had deigned to adopt from a now extinct race of gaseous entities, Krazoth began his reconnaissance. He moved through the town with surprising grace for a 3-meter-tall living tank, observing the locals as they went about their business. What he saw confounded him. These humans showed no signs of martial order. They didn't travel in combat formations. They didn't carry visible weapons. They engaged in activities that served no apparent survival purpose. Some sat staring at small, glowing rectangles. Others consumed substances that provided far more calories than would be necessary for optimal fighting performance. Most bewildering of all, they smiled. They laughed. They exhibited facial expressions that had no equivalent in Vraxian physiology or culture. What evolutionary purpose could possibly be served by exposing one's teeth in a non-threatening display? After several hours of observation, Krazoth came to an initial conclusion. Humans were either the most foolishly vulnerable species he had ever encountered, or operating on a level of deception so profound that it bordered on the incomprehensible. He needed more information. Direct interaction was required. The opportunity presented itself on the edge of town, where a standalone structure with large bay doors stood partially open. Inside, Krazoth could detect the presence of a single human and various mechanical devices. A workshop of some kind, he surmised. A suitable location for first contact, isolated but containing examples of human technology that might provide insight into their capabilities. Deactivating his cloaking device, Krazoth ducked through the entrance, his armor scraping against the top of the frame. The sound alerted the workshop's occupant. A human of smaller than average stature with appendages covered in some kind of dark, viscous substance and head fur tied back in a practical arrangement. The human looked up from the mechanical device she was manipulating, blinked twice, and said, "Either I've been huffing too many fumes, or you're not from around here." Of all the reactions Krazoth had anticipated, terror, worship, attempts to flee or fight, casual acknowledgement had not been among them. He straightened to his full height, armored plates shifting with sounds like distant avalanches, and prepared the greeting he had carefully translated into the local language. "Tremble before the might of the Vaxian Empire, fragile flesh creature. I am Krazoth, supreme champion, destroyer of worlds, crusher of resistance. Your species will be evaluated for worthiness." The human blinked again, slower this time. "Right. So definitely not a local." She wiped her hands on a cloth that was already so saturated with grime that it was essentially moving the dirt around rather than removing it. "Look, if you're here about the carburetor I was supposed to fix, I told your buddy I need another day. These vintage parts don't just materialize out of thin air." Krazoth's translator must be malfunctioning. No being had ever responded to his presence with such indifference. He tried again, this time adding a threatening posture that involved extending his secondary spine ridges. "Your understanding is incomplete. I am not a customer. I am your doom incarnate. The fate of your species rests upon my assessment." The human sighed and reached for a container that appeared to hold some kind of liquid. She consumed some before responding. "Listen, Kraz. Can I call you Kraz? It's been a long day. I've got 3 jobs due tomorrow, my diagnostic computer is on the fritz, and now there's a giant talking lobster in my garage telling me he's going to destroy the world. Unless you're here to help me rebuild this engine, can we schedule the apocalypse for next Tuesday? Krasith felt something he had never experienced in battle. Confusion that bordered on cognitive dissonance. This puny creature, with bones he could snap like kindling, was treating him with the same grave respect one might show a minor inconvenience. It defied all logic. "You do not fear me," he observed, lowering his battle claws slightly. The human shrugged, a gesture Krazoth's translator interpreted as casual dismissal. "I mean, you're definitely the scariest thing I've seen since my ex tried karaoke. But fear's a luxury for people with free time. I've got bills to pay." Then she did something even more unexpected. She pointed to the ship visible through the open bay door. "That yours? Interesting design. Propulsion system looks like it's based on controlled microfusion. You've got a coolant leak, by the way. Left nacelle." Krazoth turned to look at his vessel, momentarily forgetting his intimidation routine. "Impossible! You cannot understand vaccine technology. Don't understand it, just recognize patterns. Engines are engines. They leak when they're unhappy." She grabbed a tool that looked primitive but well used. "I could take a look if you want. My rates are reasonable, and I'm guessing you don't have a local mechanic." For the first time in his conquering career, Krazoth found himself utterly without protocol to follow. This was not how first contact was supposed to proceed. There should be cowering, declarations of submission, perhaps some ritualistic gift-giving, or at least a formal acknowledgement of his superior status. Instead, he was being offered vehicle maintenance services. "You misunderstand your situation," Krazoth attempted once more. "I am here to challenge your species, to test your worthiness for conquest or extinction." The mechanic set down her tool with deliberate care. "Challenge accepted, then. I challenge you to help me fix your ship instead of standing there making threats. If your species is so advanced, this should be child's play." Krazoth's translator took a moment to process this response, searching for the hidden meaning or tactical advantage such a statement might contain. Finding none, he was forced to conclude that the human was either insane or operating from a conceptual framework so foreign that his translation algorithms couldn't properly interpret it. "This is not a proper challenge," he protested. "Varaxian tradition demands combat. A test of strength." The mechanic actually laughed, a sound that Krazoth's audio sensors found oddly complex in its harmonics. "And human tradition, at least in my garage, demands that if you want something from someone, you don't lead with threats. You want to test our species? Start by helping me lift this engine block." She gestured to a heavy mechanical component suspended from a chain hoist. "My hydraulic lift is broken, and this needs to go back into that chassis over there. Strong as you claim to be, should be easy." It was a trap. It had to be. Yet Krazoth could detect no weapons, no hidden forces waiting to ambush him. Just a small human, covered in the residue of honest labor, making a request that would indeed be trivial for his strength to fulfill. Against all Varaxian protocol, he found himself moving toward the engine block. "I will assist. Then we will discuss proper challenge rituals." What followed was perhaps the strangest afternoon in the history of interspecies relations. The supreme champion of the Varaxian Empire, conqueror of 100 worlds, found himself in an Earth garage, holding engine parts and following the instructions of a human who barely reached his mid-thorax in height. "Careful with that manifold, it's original and irreplaceable," she'd say, and the being who had crushed entire defense systems would delicately adjust his grip. "Hand me that socket wrench," she'd request, and the warrior, who commanded armies, would sort through unfamiliar tools until he found the right one. Throughout this improbable collaboration, Krazoth observed, he noted how the human worked, not with overwhelming force, but with precision, knowledge, and adaptability. When a problem arose, she didn't smash through it. She found a creative way around it. When a part didn't fit, she modified it rather than forcing it. When she lacked strength, she created mechanical advantage through tools. It was educational. By the time the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the workshop's bay doors, Krazoth had learned more about humans than any Vraxian scout report could have told him. He had seen problem-solving that had no equivalent in his culture. He had witnessed strength that had nothing to do with muscle or exoskeleton. "Your ship's fixed," the mechanic announced, wiping her hands again on the increasingly ineffective cloth. "Coolant system patched, though you might want a proper replacement for that left temporal manifold when you get home. It's holding for now, but it's not a permanent solution." Krazoth stared at his vessel, then at the human. "You have strange priorities," he observed. "I tell you, I am here to determine if your species will be conquered, and you repair my ship." "Yeah, well," she shrugged again. "You needed help. I fix things. That's what humans do. We see problems and we solve them. Sometimes elegantly, sometimes by hitting them with a wrench until they work. Depends on the day." Her words triggered something in Krazoth's data processing centers, a realization that had been forming throughout their interaction. Before he could fully articulate it, however, his ship's communication array activated with an urgent signal. The reinforcement fleet had arrived in the system, ahead of schedule. 3 warships were in high orbit awaiting his assessment and command to begin the standard conquest protocol. The mechanic noticed his attention shift. "Friends of yours?" "My fleet," Krazoth confirmed. "They await my evaluation of human worthiness for conquest." She didn't seem particularly impressed by this information. "And? What's the verdict? Do we pass the test, or are you going to crush us under your mighty alien heel or whatever?" Krazoth turned his full attention back to the small human who had spent hours teaching him, without explicitly meaning to, about what strength truly meant. In the Vraxian Empire, power was straightforward, the ability to overwhelm opposition through superior force. Here, he had witnessed something different, the power of adaptation, of intelligence applied practically, of seeing alternatives to brute force. "I've reached a conclusion," he announced, his voice resonating through the workshop. Then, in a gesture that would have caused mass cardiac arrest among the Vraxian High Command had they witnessed it, he reached up and began detaching pieces of his ceremonial armor. The mechanic watched with raised eyebrows as the supreme champion of the Vraxian Empire systematically removed the symbols of his status and power, placing them carefully on the concrete floor between them. Finally, he unsheathed his primary battle claw, a weapon that had ended the existence of beings from a dozen worlds, and laid it at her feet. "The test is complete," he declared, his voice somehow different without the harmonic resonance of his full armor. "But it was not your species being tested. It was mine." The mechanic looked down at the pile of alien weaponry and ceremonial items, then back up at the now partially disarmed conqueror. "I'm going to need you to elaborate on that. For 12 millennia, the Vraxian Empire has equated strength with physical dominance. We crush, we conquer, we impose our will." Krazoth gestured toward the repaired engine. "Yet here, in this garage, I have witnessed true strength. Not the ability to destroy, but the ability to create, to adapt, to solve." His next transmission to the fleet would shock the Vraxian command structure to its foundations. Rather than authorizing invasion, Krazoth declared Earth a protected world, not out of mercy, but out of respect. He recommended not conquest, but contact. Not subjugation, but study. "Your species is physically weaker than almost any we have encountered," he explained to the mechanic as they stood outside the garage, watching the distant lights of the Vraxian ships adjust their positions in response to his unexpected orders. "Yet you have survived. You have thrived. You have created endless solutions to your limitations. This is strength my people have never understood." "So, no apocalypse next Tuesday?" she asked, the corner of her mouth quirking upward. "No acalipes," Krazoth confirmed. "Though I cannot promise my people will immediately understand. Change comes slowly to the Vraxian Empire." "Change comes slowly everywhere," the mechanic observed, "but it does come. especially when the old way stops working. In the months that followed, the Vraxian Empire experienced something unprecedented. Philosophical debate. Krazoth's decision and his detailed report on human adaptability sparked a re-examination of their most fundamental cultural assumptions. If strength could manifest in ways beyond the physical, what did that mean for a society built entirely around one narrow definition of power? Diplomatic relations were cautiously established. Human ingenuity met Vraxian durability, and both species found they had much to learn from each other. The mechanic became something of an unofficial ambassador, her straightforward approach to problem-solving providing a bridge between radically different worldviews. And throughout the galaxy, a new story began to spread. How the mightiest warrior of the most feared empire in known space had laid down his weapons not in defeat, but in recognition of a truth his people had missed for millennia. That true strength lies not in the ability to break, but in the capacity to build. Not in conquest, but in adaptation. Not in force, but in finding another way. To the grand cosmic irony that the universe occasionally provides, the species that had spent 12,000 years conquering others had, in the end, been conquered themselves. Not by superior weaponry or tactics, but by a simple idea, presented by a grease-stained mechanic who just wanted to get her work done on time. The Vraxians had sought to find worlds worthy of their might. Instead, they found themselves worthy of something more. As for Krazoth, he retained his title of Supreme Champion, though its meaning evolved along with his people's understanding of strength. He divided his time between Vraxian space and Earth, where he could often be found in a certain garage, learning about engine modifications and teaching the art of Vraxian metallurgy in return. "You know," the mechanic told him one day, as they collaboratively upgraded the cooling system on a particularly temperamental spacecraft, "for an alien warlord who showed up threatening extinction, you're not bad company." Krazoth, who had gradually learned to modulate his voice to less window-rattling levels, replied with what might almost have been humor. "For a fragile flesh creature, you are surprisingly difficult to intimidate." "It's a human thing," she said, tightening a bolt with perfect precision. "We've spent so long being afraid of everything that eventually we just got bored with fear and decided to get on with the business of living." And in that simple statement lay perhaps the greatest lesson the mighty Vraxian Empire would ever learn. As Krazoth watched the mechanic solve problems with ingenuity rather than force, he finally understood true strength. The Vraxian Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had been conquered themselves, not by weapons but by a simple truth. Adaptation outmatches brute force every time. Humanity's greatest weapon was perspective.